What happens when one of television's toughest interviewers sits down with a guest who expects a friendly conversation instead of hard-hitting questions? You're about to find out, and trust me, this interview quickly turns into a tense and unforgettable exchange. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think public figures should always be prepared to answer difficult questions? Let's dive in. The studio lights glowed brightly, illuminating the polished desk where Piers Morgan adjusted his tie with the confidence of someone who had interviewed prime ministers, presidents, and countless controversial public figures. His producer had warned him this could be a challenging interview, but difficult conversations were exactly what he was known for. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a very special guest," Piers began, his voice carrying the authority viewers had come to expect. "She has dominated headlines around the world and no doubt has plenty to say about recent events. Please welcome Meghan Markle." The audience applauded politely as Meghan walked onto the set. Her smile appeared polished, and her posture reflected the confidence of someone accustomed to the spotlight. Taking her seat, she seemed prepared for another high-profile interview. "Meghan, thank you for joining us tonight," Piers said, leaning forward slightly. "You've spoken publicly about your experiences, and I think our viewers would appreciate some direct answers to a few important questions." For a brief moment, Meghan's smile seemed to falter before she quickly regained her composure. "Of course, Piers," she replied. "I'm always happy to share my perspective and set the record straight." "Your perspective," Piers repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's a phrase we've heard quite often. My interest, though, is in the facts and how they compare with the public record." The atmosphere in the studio noticeably shifted. Meghan adjusted her posture but remained composed. "My perspective comes from my own lived experiences," she responded. "Absolutely," Piers replied evenly. "No one is questioning your personal experiences. But when public statements appear to conflict with documented information, it's fair for journalists to ask about those differences." Meghan's expression tightened ever so slightly. "I'm not sure what you're suggesting," she said. "I'm not suggesting anything," Piers answered as he opened a folder in front of him. "I'm asking straightforward questions. That's the job of a journalist." He glanced at his notes before continuing. "For example, there has been public discussion surrounding comments about your wedding ceremony. The Archbishop of Canterbury later offered a different account of those events. How do you explain that difference?" "That's a private matter," Meghan replied, her voice becoming more guarded. "I don't think it's appropriate to discuss the intimate details of my wedding." Piers paused before responding. "But it became part of the public conversation because it was discussed publicly," he said. "When claims are made on an international platform, it's reasonable for people to ask questions about their accuracy." The studio audience fell silent, sensing the conversation becoming more serious. "I feel you're being unnecessarily confrontational," Meghan said. "I came here for a conversation, not an interrogation." "Asking for clarification isn't an attack," Piers replied calmly. "It's journalism. When public statements involve other people or significant events, they naturally invite scrutiny. Wouldn't you agree?" Meghan clasped her hands together. "I think you're taking my words out of context," she responded. "I'm simply reading your own words," Piers said, lifting a transcript from the desk. "These are direct quotations." "You said," Piers began, glancing at his notes, "and I'm quoting your previous interview, that you and Prince Harry were married 3 days before the public ceremony in a private exchange with the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop later stated that no legal marriage took place before the official ceremony, describing it instead as a private exchange of vows. Can you explain the difference between those two accounts?" The question lingered in the air. For the first time, Meghan appeared to pause longer than usual before answering, as though carefully weighing every word. "I think you're focusing on technicalities rather than what that moment meant to us emotionally," she replied, a hint of frustration creeping into her voice. "What mattered was the commitment we made to each other." "Technicalities?" Piers repeated, leaning back with a measured expression. "Meghan, this wasn't simply about symbolism. You made a public statement that reached millions of viewers. When the individual involved later offers a different description of those events, it naturally raises questions. That's why I'm asking for clarification." The atmosphere in the studio grew noticeably heavier. Meghan's confident smile became more restrained, and her posture stiffened. "I don't appreciate the implication that I'm being dishonest on national television," she said. "I'm not making that accusation," Piers replied calmly. "I'm asking you to explain an apparent inconsistency between your public comments and the public record. If there's context that people are missing, this is your opportunity to provide it." The tension was impossible to ignore. What had begun as a routine celebrity interview was evolving into a much more challenging exchange, and the audience could sense it. "I think you're deliberately misunderstanding what I meant," Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. "Actually, I'm trying to understand it," Piers answered, keeping his tone even. "And I imagine many viewers are as well. That's the purpose of this conversation, to seek clarity." For a brief moment, Meghan shifted in her seat as if considering whether to end the discussion altogether before settling back into the chair. "I agreed to what I believed would be a fair interview," she said, now speaking more firmly, "not an interrogation." "A fair interview includes fair questions," Piers responded. "Sometimes those questions are uncomfortable, particularly when they concern statements that have already been made in public. That's part of journalism." The divide between interviewer and guest had become unmistakable. Sensing the conversation had reached a standstill, Piers turned a page in his notes. "Let's move to another subject," he said. "You've spoken publicly about allegations of racism within the royal family, claims that attracted worldwide attention and sparked intense debate. Many people have asked whether you can provide specific evidence or examples to support those allegations." Meghan's expression immediately hardened. "I experienced it," she replied. "For me, that experience speaks for itself." "Personal experience is undoubtedly important," Piers acknowledged. "At the same time, when allegations involve major public institutions and have significant international impact, many people naturally ask for additional details or context. Can you offer any specific examples that would help people better understand your concerns?" "Are you suggesting I fabricated my experience?" Meghan asked, her voice noticeably louder. "I'm asking for specifics," Piers replied, without raising his own voice. "You've shared serious concerns publicly, and I think viewers are looking for a clearer understanding of the events you're referring to." "You've spoken about conversations concerning your son's skin color," Piers continued, "but you've chosen not to identify who made those comments, when they were made, or the context in which they occurred. Without those details, how can anyone fairly assess or respond to such serious allegations?" Meghan shifted in her chair, taking a measured breath before replying. "I chose not to name anyone because I wanted to protect those involved," she said. "I could have identified people, but I made a conscious decision not to." "Protect them?" Piers asked, leaning forward. "You raised concerns that sparked worldwide debate about the royal family. If the individuals involved remain anonymous, doesn't that leave the entire institution under suspicion?" "I never identified specific people," Meghan replied firmly. "No," Piers acknowledged, "but the lack of specifics has allowed widespread speculation. Many people have drawn their own conclusions without knowing exactly what happened or who was involved. Can you understand why some believe that creates more questions than answers?" The conversation had grown noticeably more intense. Meghan's carefully composed demeanor began to show signs of strain. Her posture became more guarded as she considered her response. "I don't feel I have to prove my personal experience to anyone," she said. "What I lived through was real." "Your experience is important," Piers replied evenly. "But when concerns are raised publicly about an institution watched by millions around the world, people naturally ask for evidence or context. That's how public accountability works." He paused before continuing. "These statements have had an enormous impact on public discussion. They've influenced perceptions of the royal family and generated debate across the Commonwealth. Given those consequences, can you understand why many people are looking for more than broad allegations?" So now I'm responsible for how people reacted? Meghan asked, her voice tightening. I'm asking whether public figures should also accept responsibility for how serious public allegations are presented, Piers answered. If accusations carry significant consequences, shouldn't they also be accompanied by enough detail for others to understand or evaluate them? For a moment, Meghan stood and took a few steps behind her chair, clearly trying to gather herself. The cameras quietly adjusted to follow her movement while members of her team exchanged concerned glances just beyond the studio lights. This is exactly the kind of treatment that pushed me away in the first place, she said. You seem more interested in defending the institution than understanding what I experienced. I'm interested in establishing the facts, Piers replied, his voice calm but unwavering. My role is to ask questions, especially when the issues involved are serious and affect public opinion. Meghan let out a short, frustrated laugh. So this is what you call responsible journalism? Yes, Piers answered. Responsible journalism means asking difficult questions, regardless of who the guest is or how uncomfortable the discussion may become. He paused before adding, I've spent my career questioning governments, institutions, and influential people. The principle is the same for everyone. So, because I'm speaking publicly about my experience, I'm the one being put on trial? Meghan asked, emotion beginning to show in her voice. You're a public figure making significant public claims, Piers replied. Those claims deserve to be examined. That standard applies equally to everyone, regardless of background, status, or identity. The words hung in the studio. Meghan looked at him in silence for a moment, searching for a response. That's unfair, she finally said quietly. You don't know what it's like to be in my position. You're right, Piers acknowledged. I can't know your personal experience, but I do know the responsibility that comes with journalism, and that responsibility is to ask questions and pursue clarity whenever important public claims are made. Slowly, Meghan returned to her seat. The confidence she had displayed at the beginning of the interview had given way to a far more cautious expression as the conversation entered its next phase. The composed confidence Meghan had displayed at the start of the interview appeared to fade. She sat more rigidly now, choosing her words with greater care as the conversation continued. Piers glanced down at his notes before introducing another topic. Let's talk about your relationship with your father, he said. You've spoken publicly about your estrangement from him. At the same time, you've also discussed the difficulties you experienced after joining the royal family. Many viewers have wondered how those relationships evolved so differently. Can you help explain that? My father betrayed my trust, Meghan replied without hesitation. He cooperated with the media and allowed private matters to become public. Piers nodded. He has acknowledged making mistakes, he said. At the same time, reports have suggested he was dealing with intense media attention and significant health challenges during that period. Looking back, do you believe there was ever an opportunity for reconciliation? Meghan's expression hardened. You don't know everything that happened, she replied. There's much more to the story than people realize. Then help us understand, Piers said. Many people remember your father as someone who supported you throughout your early life. They struggle to understand how that relationship reached the point of complete estrangement. He made his decisions, Meghan answered quietly, and I made mine. Piers paused before asking another question. Even after his reported health issues, did you ever consider reopening that relationship, or had the trust already been broken beyond repair? The question seemed to strike a nerve. Meghan looked away for a moment before turning back. I think that question is unfair, she said softly. I appreciate that it's deeply personal, Piers replied. But it's also a subject you've discussed publicly, which is why people continue to ask about it. The atmosphere inside the studio had become noticeably heavier. Neither the audience nor the production crew seemed willing to interrupt the silence that followed. After a brief pause, Piers spoke again, his tone measured. Meghan, I understand these are difficult topics, But when public interviews shape worldwide conversations, people naturally expect those statements to be examined. Examined or challenged? Meghan asked. Because there's a difference. There is, Piers agreed. My intention is to ask questions, not to make judgments. So far, I've asked about statements you've made publicly, areas where different accounts exist, and issues that continue to generate public debate. Those are questions many journalists would likely ask. Meghan brushed away a tear before responding. "You're just like everyone else," she said. "You don't like that I spoke openly about my experiences." "I have no objection to people speaking openly," Piers replied. "In fact, much of my career has involved encouraging difficult conversations and challenging powerful institutions." He paused before continuing. "But speaking publicly also brings accountability. It means understanding that people may ask follow-up questions, seek clarification, or request evidence when serious allegations have broad public consequences. I don't believe I should have to justify my personal experiences," Meghan said, her voice growing stronger. "Your personal experiences are yours," Piers responded. "The distinction I'm making is between personal experience and public allegations involving other individuals or institutions. When claims have significant public impact, many people expect additional context or supporting information." The studio fell silent once again. Members of the production crew exchanged cautious glances as the conversation grew increasingly emotional. Piers continued carefully. "You've raised concerns about racism, mental health support, and your treatment within the royal family. Those are serious issues and they deserve to be discussed thoughtfully. At the same time, many viewers continue to ask for greater detail so they can better understand the events you're describing." Before he could continue, Meghan stood abruptly from her chair, causing it to roll backward across the studio floor. For a moment, the entire set fell completely silent. "I think we're finished here." Meghan rose from her chair, her voice tense as she removed her earpiece. The calm confidence she had carried onto the set had given way to visible frustration. "I'm not going to sit here and be questioned as though I'm on trial," she said. Piers remained seated, composed despite the tension filling the studio. "My job isn't to put anyone on trial," he replied evenly. "My job is to ask questions. When public statements influence millions of people, those questions become part of the conversation." "You've twisted everything I've said," Meghan answered, shaking her head. "You've ignored my experiences and reduced them to a debate." "I'm asking for clarification," Piers responded. "Those are two very different things." For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence itself became part of the interview. Meghan reached for her belongings, her movements quick and deliberate. "I don't have to prove my experiences to anyone." "No one can take away your personal experiences," Piers replied. "But when serious allegations are made publicly, allegations that affect institutions, families, and public opinion, people naturally ask questions. That isn't hostility. It's accountability." She stopped and looked back. "So you think I owe the public an explanation?" "I think anyone who makes significant public claims should expect scrutiny," Piers answered. "That principle applies to politicians, celebrities, business leaders, and journalists alike." The atmosphere inside the studio had become almost unbearable. Even the production crew remained silent, unwilling to interrupt the exchange. "You're not interested in understanding," Meghan said quietly. "You're interested in winning." Piers shook his head. "This isn't about winning." He paused before continuing. "It's about whether difficult questions should still be asked, even when the answers may be uncomfortable." For a brief moment, it appeared Meghan might return to her seat. Instead, she unclipped her microphone and placed it on the desk. "Then this interview is over." "You're free to end it whenever you choose," Piers replied. "But ending the conversation doesn't necessarily end the questions." She stared at him for a moment before turning toward the studio exit. Just before leaving, she looked back one final time. "I believe people will decide for themselves what happened here." "I hope they do," Piers answered. "That's exactly what informed audiences should do. Listen carefully, consider the evidence, and reach their own conclusions. Without another word, Meghan walked off the set as members of her team followed behind. The studio doors closed. For a few seconds, complete silence filled the room. Piers adjusted his tie, glanced toward the main camera, and spoke in the same calm tone with which the interview had begun. "Well," he said, "I think tonight has demonstrated something important." He paused. Journalism isn't about asking easy questions. It isn't about making guests comfortable or confirming what audiences already believe. Its purpose is to test claims, seek clarity, and give viewers the information they need to think for themselves. The camera slowly pushed in. Whether you agreed with every question asked tonight or disagreed with them entirely is up to you. Healthy debate depends on people being free to challenge ideas and equally free to defend them. He folded his notes and placed them on the desk. In the end, every viewer will reach a different conclusion. Some will believe the questions were fair. Others will believe they went too far. But that's precisely why open conversations matter. Accountability and empathy don't have to be opposites. A society that values both can ask difficult questions while still respecting the people answering them. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the broadcast drew to a close. Sometimes the most memorable interviews aren't remembered because everyone agreed. They're remembered because they forced people to think. And perhaps that's the real purpose of journalism. Not to tell people what to believe, but to give them the information, the questions, and the space to decide for themselves. If you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth discussions. And now we'd like to hear from you. Do you think public figures should always be prepared to answer difficult questions about statements they've made publicly? Or do you believe there are limits to what interviewers should ask? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation.